If you've seen some of my YouTube documentaries already, you'll know that virtually all of them examine the possibility of there being an afterlife, that is, consciousness surviving the death of the body. If there's a greater reality than the material world alone, then what is the evidence? This time I'm focusing on an eccentric woman known for her psychic abilities. Joan Grant was born in 1907 to a wealthy Edwardian family living on the English south coast. Her father, Jack Marshall, shown here, was a respected scientist involved in mosquito research, for which he was awarded the prestigious CBE, while her mother, Blanche, was a society psychic. This is a photograph of Blanche with the young Joan. Blanche foresaw the sinking of the Titanic on its maiden voyage, and during the First World War she saved her family from another sinking during a visit to New York. 3 weeks before they were due to return to England, Blanche noticed the tickets and declared, "The Lusitania is going to sink on that voyage," and she demanded her husband change the reservations. Reluctantly he did so, having to exchange their customary luxurious staterooms on that later sailing for inferior bunkroom cabins on the Lusitania leaving in just 2 days' time. As she predicted, the Lusitania voyage that they would have been on ended in tragedy. The ship was hit by German torpedoes on the 7th of May 1915, and it sank in 18 minutes, just 11 miles from the Irish coast, and 1,200 people were killed. So clearly Joan had a psychic family background. Even as a child, she knew she'd lived numerous lives before her current one, and she often told bemused adults about these previous incarnations, and she would say, "That was before I was Joan." The elders, of course, assumed that she had a vivid imagination, but strange incidents made even the grown-ups think twice about this little girl's claims. When she was 9 years old, with the First World War still in progress, Joan used to suffer nightmares about the conflict. One morning in 1916, at the breakfast table, she told her father about her latest vivid dream. Sitting with her father was a friend on leave and just back from the front. Joan said, "Last night I was with a man called MacAndrew and he was killed. I cannot remember the name of the regiment, but can describe the regimental badge. It was not an English one, and I can tell you the slang name of his front-line trench." The visiting soldier was amazed, since he recognized the Canadian regiment that Joan referred to. Later he contacted her father. "Regarding Joan," he wrote, "For heaven's sake, don't laugh at the child. I have checked what she said, and a battalion of that regiment went over the top on a night attack a few hours before Joan mentioned it at breakfast, and a Private MacAndrew was among those killed. And she was also correct about the name of the front-line trench." Well, this letter underlined for Jack that his daughter was privy to information about events distant in both space and time. But as a scientist, he rejected a supernatural explanation for these uncanny insights. On another occasion, a Professor C.G. Lamb from Cambridge University came to visit Jack. The professor had once been a close friend of Jack's mother, Jenny Marshall, and he became intrigued by Joan's conversation. She suddenly remarked, "Jenny gives me music lessons." Hello? Hello? Jenny gives me music lessons. And she walked over to the piano saying, "Father knows I would never be a first-class pianist, so there's no point in my having lessons. But Jenny knows I need music, and she teaches me." And when she played Jenny Marshall's music for Professor Lamb, he was flabbergasted. Lamb had been very fond of Joan's long-dead grandmother, and here was a medley that she often played for him years ago, before Joan was even born. The old man declared, "This is impossible, yet completely evidential. You just played music that I've not heard since your grandmother died." What baffled Lamb was that when Jenny Marshall discovered that she was dying from cancer, she decided to burn the manuscripts of her compositions to prevent anybody else from playing them after she was gone. And yet here was Joan playing them. This is a photograph of H.G. Wells, the father of science fiction. His 51 novels include the classics The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, The War of the Worlds, and The First Men in the Moon. These titles have enthralled readers for over a century, and Joan had the privilege of meeting him when she was age 16, when he visited her home. He seemed open-minded, so she told him about her previous lives, and Wells advised her to remain discreet about these past incarnations. "Keep it to yourself, Joan," he said, "until you're strong enough to bear being laughed at by fools. When you're ready, write down everything you can." And he added, "I think it's important you should become a writer," which is precisely what she did as an adult. She came to fame in 1937 at the age of 30, when she published her first historical novel set in ancient Egypt. Entitled Winged Pharaoh, the Sunday Times reviewer said, "I've been enthralled by this book as by nothing I've read for years." Well, with reviews like this, it entered the bestseller lists around the world. It was admired for the way that it drew a vivid picture of a society possibly wiser than ours is today. Central to the story were the ideals and values of Sakita, its young heroine, who became a priest ruler in ancient Egypt. Scholars and critics alike concluded that the book had been thoroughly well researched. The Times of London hailed it as "in a class apart, glowing." And the New York Times said, "A book of fine idealism, deep compassion and a spiritual quality pure and bright as flame." By 1938 it was already in its 6th edition, just 1 year after it came out. But controversy reigned when Joan announced that she'd not actually researched a single historical detail to give her work its authenticity. Instead, she'd drawn on personal memories from her previous life as a priest Pharaoh, dictating this life while in a trance state in over 100 recall sessions, which she then pieced together into chronological order afterwards. Commenting on Winged Pharaoh more recently, Claire Armistead in the Guardian newspaper was sceptical. "It's tempting today to dismiss her as either batty or a fraud," she wrote. "Why should any perfectly decent popular novelist encase herself in such a peculiar mythology?" But Joan was a born storyteller and could inspire and grip her readers regardless of doubts about her past life claims. In 1936, Joan had come into possession of an ancient Egyptian scarab charm. The one in this photograph comes from around 1450 BC, but there are more modern versions available too. I should add that this scarab beetle had a sacred status among ancient Egyptians, being a symbol of the idea of rebirth and regeneration. Joan discovered that each time that she handled her scarab charm, she could recall her life as Sakita, the daughter of an ancient pharaoh. So could this first bestseller perhaps be regarded as a posthumous autobiography? Interestingly, Grant's husband, Leslie Grant, was an archaeologist himself who took her to Egypt with him. But she had no significant insights on that trip. Only 18 months later did she recall her ancient connection with Egypt that resulted in her bestsellers. Joan revealed that through hard mental discipline, some ancient Egyptians were able to shift their level of consciousness, allowing them to recall past lives and come to terms with their former deaths. Joan said initiates were shut in a dark tomb for 4 days at a time to hone these skills, and this is what she had done herself, becoming a priestess in the process. She went on to write novels using this technique that she called far memory, and 4 of them dealt with Egypt. Winged Pharaoh, Eyes of Horus, Lord of the Horizon, and so Moses was born. Another novel was set in Greece entitled Return to Elysium. Life as Carola took place in Italy during the Renaissance. And Scarlet Feather occurs in America at a time when native Indians alone inhabited the continent. In a book entitled The Mind's Secrets, the author Tom Sleeman says together these novels and other writings represent one of the finest collections of literary output from any modern writer. A delight to read as they lead us into a deeper understanding of our own potential as human beings. Joan Grant contended that not only did every person alive today have previous lifetimes stretching back into the remote past, she also asserted that many people's illness, psychoses and phobias have their roots in trauma from previous lives. And in her view, the way to resolve these problems was to relive and confront the incidents concerned. Today, many regression therapists would agree with her. Joan admitted being forced to face various of her own deaths, being burned at the stake for witchcraft, having a spear driven through her eye during a jousting tournament, committing suicide and dying from snake bites. Along this eternal road of life, Joan seems to have been predominantly female, but not always of the same gender. Over 3,000 years ago, in the reign of Ramesses II, she says she was a man named Rab-Hotep. In the 16th century, she was female again, born in Italy as Carola de Ludovici, a singer with a troupe of strolling players, who nonetheless died aged only 27. And in what was probably her last previous life, she was also female, named Lavinia, and she died in 1875 by falling from a horse and breaking her back. The only explanation she offered for these lives was a strange analogy. Joan and Sakita are but two beads on the same necklace, and the memory they share is contained in that string. She also claimed that many people that we're close to in our current lives have shared our lives in previous times, sometimes as husbands, sometimes as wives, brothers, sisters, sons or daughters. She claimed to have known Dr. Kelsey, her third husband, in several previous incarnations. The spirit, according to Joan, is androgynous, containing both male and female characteristics. To complete this tale, you may wish to read one of Joan Grant's novels to judge if she deserved the praise that she received. While she's been described as eccentric, histrionic, and a fantasist, in fact no empirical evidence proves her claims, however sincere she was about them. This is a photograph of Jean Overton Fuller, a poet, an artist, and a biographer, and a believer, as it happens, in reincarnation. She once met Joan and became keen to discover if her visions could be real. She contacted Egyptologists and she studied hieroglyphics to verify what Jean saw. Her conclusions were suggestive of support rather than truly evidential. But in addition to her novels, there are two biographies that, in my view, are as worth reading as the novels themselves. Far Memory was published in 1956. It is the most touching, most amusing, most astonishing real-life story I have ever read, Nancy Spain wrote in the Daily Express. The book is as rare and rich as the best kind of Christmas pudding, and filled with all sorts of unexpected rewards, said the New Statesman. Her second autobiography, Many Lifetimes, was published 13 years later, written jointly with her third husband, Dr. Dennis Kelsey, a psychiatrist with whom she used to work using past life regression therapy. Joan was an oddball, capricious character who lived to the age of 82, and during that lifetime her books were published in 15 languages. In later years she suffered irregular heartbeats that she called the bumps, and she spent long periods in bed before her final demise in 1989. If you want to find out more about this author, there's a website, joangrant.net, and within that website you can find a video to watch entitled The Extraordinary Lifetimes of Joan Grant. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for listening.